We're going to talk a little bit about how to use flow to lead and govern agile organizations or organizations in general. We're going to look at some of the things that organizations are coming up against and some of the challenges that they're going to face, especially if they're doing a waterfall to agile transformation or any kind of transformation or digitalization effort. If your company is going quote unquote digital everywhere, then this still applies and you're going to face the same challenges. Here are a few of the challenges, and what's interesting about this is that this hasn't changed in the better part of almost a decade, because most of the companies are struggling desperately with command and control. No more micromanaging. Most companies are just having a lot of heartburn trying to let go. It's not in their DNA. It's not in who they are. And if you're a company that's making products that puts people's lives at risk, well, you might have to be making some sacrifices, trade-offs, and compromises in order to be able to mitigate the command and control in order to get the benefit that you're trying to achieve with Agile. If you talk to the purists, Agile is a bottom-up, self-organizing methodology where it's a primarily team-level methodology. It's even in the Scrum guide, when one of the earlier versions, it said Scrum is optimized for teams of 5 to 7 people, or 7 people plus or minus 2, so like 5 to 9 people. Scrum.org has expanded that to 3 to 9 people, and somewhere in between is the truth. And the primary thing is that it's optimized for teams, not organizations. Okay. One of the Agile manifesto signers, he had famously been quoting that scaling is the last thing you should do, meaning that you shouldn't scale until you have all your teams doing Scrum or Agile or Kanban or XP properly. When the teams are doing that properly, then you can look at doing scaling. Not until then. Or you could also interpret it that scaling is the last thing you should ever do, meaning you should never do it. So it's a very bottom-up, team-level, optimized methodology. So what about the enterprise? Where do the managers, senior managers, executives, board of directors fit in? What are their new agile roles? Is it possible to drive agility top-down and bottom-up at the same time? And how do you do that? And so the 3 primary roles, and we're not going to go deep into this. In fact, if you want to really look at the roles or what needs to be done, that's going to be covered primarily in the transformation slides. We're going to talk a little bit more about it here in the next section. But the executives, they have to be with on the journey. They set the vision. They help shape the culture. Okay? And that's absolutely key to whether or not you will succeed in having a sustainable agile transformation where people aren't just doing agile, they're learning to be agile and they actually integrate the mindset into their new way of thinking. You'll also need to look at, okay, how are we going to manage the communications and flows at each organizational level? And the executives have to be with on prioritization, and somehow you're going to have to be able to organize either or know or measure your organization's velocity and or the health of your organization. And there's many different ways to do that. So Flow enables successful transformation and scaling. Flow, in its DNA, is ultimately a leadership framework, and the leadership frameworks go directly to mindset. And if you're not helping people adapt and adopt a new mindset and actually be able to use it in their daily work, then your scaling efforts are probably going to go off in the weeds and not deliver what the organization was expecting. So, in this section, we're going to skip vision and culture. We've talked a lot about that in the other slides earlier. We've also talked about using the 4-box for communications and things like that. This section, we're going to talk about executive prioritization and knowing your organization's velocity. It's going to be really tough coming up with flexible KPIs and being able to baseline it, because if you don't sort your teams into persistent dedicated teams, you're going to have a horrible nightmare trying to measure and baseline anything. So you're going to have to make compromises. You're going to have to look at, okay, do we baseline and measure programs against each other? And Agile purists would say, well, hey, you're not supposed to compare teams to each other because one program's team composition may not be anything like another program's team composition. So the best thing that you can do is measure the the program itself, and over time, after 5, 6, 7 increments, product increments or program increments, however you want to measure that, you need to have a way that you can actually be able to measure the teams. And we have various ways of doing that, and we get into that in other parts and in other presentations. You'll see the measurement part pretty well outlined in the transformation video series, and I believe we touch on some of it in this video series as well. This is the 11th annual survey, State of Agile, from Verizon One. And when you're looking at this and you go, okay, it's about 68% if you look at the amount of Scrum and the Scrum hybrids. It's 68%. If you added Scrumban into that, it becomes 76%. As I mentioned earlier, it's anywhere from 70 to 75%. So that's right on target. As far as what is being used, where you could say it's Scrum. And so the Agilists, they want it to be less focused on Scrum. So I think that this is a little bit misleading, the way that these are presented, but it gives you an idea of what's out there and what's being used. I think right now we're on the 13th annual survey. And in that one, it was 72% was the total for Scrum, Scrum Hybrid, and Scrumban. So the numbers are pretty stable. And, you know, what's really humorous for me is the 2% that don't know. It's like, seriously, you're doing Agile and you don't know what it is? Okay, cool. Or maybe they're doing it in a homegrown way that they don't know what to call it, or it doesn't have any specific labels. So the elements of enterprise flow include simplicity, clarity, focus on vision at every level, the ability to prioritize, and that includes the executives getting in there and helping do the prioritization for their portfolios, including the programs in those portfolios and all the projects or teams that are working in or with those programs. It needs to be visible. You need to have the rooms, the Agile rooms, where you can put things up on the wall, make it big and visible. If you don't have that, You need to come up with a way that you can do that. I've seen a lot of clever ways that companies try to do that. If you're relying on tools, you are also going to introduce potential errors into the system, and things can get missed and dropped. You want to focus on doing short cycles and small batch sizes. When you do the exercises with us, you're going to do something called the penny game, and that's going to drive home these 2 points very, very well. We need to be aware about the intrinsic motivation and how to help people actually transform and get the mindset that they need to have. And then the decision making and governance needs to be moved to the lowest possible level within the organization. And that also is going to require change that many organizations are unwilling to make. This is the scaling methodologies, and in the 13th annual, one more has popped up as a scaling methodology called the Spotify model. The Agile coaches that I've met at Spotify, many of them say that it's the Spotify's, it's not a model. Okay, did you get that? It's not a model. And some of these things, like a Scrum of Scrums, in this one, Scrum of Scrums is not really a scaling method. I guess it could be considered an approach, and that's probably why they're using the word approach. But many of the companies that are using Scrum of Scrums quickly find out that it doesn't achieve what they thought or wanted to achieve using it. Right now, scaled agile framework is the big one, and I think in the latest 13th annual, they're up to about 29%. In any case, it's the 800-pound gorilla of scaling. Agile purists tend to hate things like SAFe or less, which is large scale Scrum or Nexus or DAD. I keep chuckling whenever I see Rage. Recipes for disaster. Oh, no, sorry. Recipes for agile governance in the enterprise. Just doesn't sound good to call it Rage. Agile portfolio management or agile program management. You've got lean management. There are more than one way to get this done at the program and portfolio level. And remember, those are in the two right-hand boxes in the 4 lenses on transformation. For the work streams and cadences, every company has its governance that it's doing. And if those are quarterly meetings, they may have a list of items that they have to do at those meetings. They may have a list of portfolios. They may have a list of programs. They may have a list of projects that they're going through. And if you've got a project backlog, it needs to be prioritized, and you need to have leadership to choose what things are going to go first. The Agile Transformation Group should be there helping everybody increase their competencies and skills. Okay. And typically you'll have some kind of Agile Transformation team or Agile Transformation Group that's working with getting everybody trained and helping them get the tool sets and mindsets that they're going to need in order to succeed. And that should be at a pretty high level in the organization, almost probably should report to the C level. The PMOs, or PMO, depending on if you have a single or multiple, if you have an enterprise PMO, they need to be able to help the multi-team project management and product development in the programs be able to smoke out cross dependencies and integration items. They should be able to provide the tool sets that make sense for your organization, and they should also be able to help in sorting everyone into persistent dedicated teams. but you're going to need the line managers to do that as well. So it becomes very complicated very quickly. And the PMOs, they typically have a monthly reporting cadence out to the projects and teams and upwards to the executives. And then they have a quarterly cadence that aligns with the governance and portfolio level.